Thanksgiving was supposed to be safe. Neutral ground. One day a year where my family pretended we were functional, where grudges were hidden under cranberry sauce and polite smiles. I almost didn't go, but my mother's voice on the phone had sounded hopeful in that fragile way that made saying no feel cruel. I told myself it would just be a few hours. Eat, smile, leave. No one needed to know anything about my life beyond the surface. I had spent years making sure of that. The house smelled the same as it always had, roasted turkey, butter, and something faintly burnt because my sister, Lila, never followed recipes. The moment I stepped inside, I felt that familiar tightening in my chest, the one that came from being the least important person in the room. Lila was already there, loud and glowing, holding court like she always did. She was everything my parents admired, confident, charming, visibly successful in ways people understood. Marriage, kids, a big house she loved to mention. I was the quiet one. The one who left early, worked too much, and never shared details. That had been intentional. Dinner started normally enough. Small talk. Complaints about traffic. Jokes about how dry the turkey might be this year. I kept my answers vague when people asked about work. I always did. Consulting, I said, like it was a spell that made people lose interest. It usually worked. Lila rolled her eyes like she always did, the unspoken message clear: my life was boring, insignificant, not worth digging into. Halfway through the meal, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I ignored it at first, but it kept vibrating. Instinctively, I glanced down, just long enough to see a notification from my private bank app. I should have turned the screen away faster. I didn't. Lila saw it. What was that? She asked, too casually. Her eyes were already sharp, curious in the way that made my stomach sink. That didn't look like a normal bank app. I smiled tightly. Just work stuff. She leaned closer, pretending to reach for the gravy boat, and I realized too late that she was watching my phone reflection in the window. Her eyebrows lifted. Her mouth opened slightly. Wait, she said, louder now. Did that say 8 million? The table went quiet. My mother froze with her fork halfway to her mouth. My father frowned. Lila laughed, but it was the kind of laugh that came from shock, not humor. No way, she said. Tell me I didn't just see that. I felt heat crawl up my neck. Every instinct screamed at me to shut it down, but the damage was already done. It's nothing, I said. You misread it. She grabbed her phone, already typing. Hold on, she said. 8.6 million. She looked up at me, eyes bright, hungry. You're a millionaire. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. My mother's face changed first. Surprise, then confusion, then something else, calculation. My father leaned back in his chair, studying me like he was trying to reconcile the person he thought I was with the number he'd just heard. Lila's shock turned into delight so fast it made my skin crawl. Oh my God, she said loudly. Everyone, do you realize what this means? He's been sitting here for years, acting like he's barely scraping by, and he's loaded. I wanted to disappear. Questions exploded around the table. How long? How did I make it? Why didn't I tell anyone? I tried to deflect, to downplay it, but Lila wouldn't let me. She was enjoying this too much. She started filling in gaps with assumptions, exaggerating, turning my private life into entertainment. I always knew you were hiding something, she said, grinning. I mean, who else just disappears for months at a time? My mother reached for my hand. Why wouldn't you tell us? She asked softly, but there was hurt in her voice that felt rehearsed. We're your family. I looked at her hand on mine and remembered every time she'd told me Lila needed more help because she had kids. Every time my achievements were met with silence while my sister's smallest milestones were celebrated. I didn't think it was important, I said carefully. Lila snorted. Not important. She laughed again, louder. You have $8.6 million. That's not just important, that's life-changing. For all of us. There it was. The word hung in the air like smoke. Us. Not you. Not him. Us. My father cleared his throat. You know, he said slowly, family helps family. And if you're doing that well, maybe it's time we talked about. No, I said, more sharply than I meant to. The table went silent again. My heart pounded, but I didn't take it back. I'm not talking about money. Lila's smile faded, just a little. Wow, she said. I didn't realize success made you so selfish. That old accusation. The one she always used when I didn't bend. The rest of the meal was unbearable. Every conversation circled back to money. Suggestions disguised as jokes. Complaints about expenses. My mother mentioning medical bills she'd never brought up before. Lila talking about how expensive college would be for her kids. Each comment felt like a test, a probe, a way to see how much they could extract. When dinner finally ended, Lila cornered me in the kitchen while everyone else was distracted. You know they're going to expect something, she said quietly. You can't just sit on that kind of money while the rest of us struggle. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the truth beneath the concern. She wasn't angry I'd hidden the money. She was angry she hadn't known sooner. Angry she hadn't benefited from it already. I didn't expose you to hurt you, she added quickly. I just thought everyone deserved to know. I nodded slowly. Of course you did. I left soon after, citing work. My hands were shaking by the time I reached my car. I sat there for a long time, staring at the steering wheel, replaying everything. I'd worked so hard to keep my life separate, to build something that belonged to me alone. One careless glance, one moment of weakness, and it was gone. Or so they thought. What my family didn't know, what Lila couldn't possibly have guessed, was that the money wasn't sitting idle. It wasn't just a number in an account waiting to be shared. It was structured, protected, tied to trusts, contracts, and legal walls I'd built for a reason. I hadn't survived the early years by being careless. By the time I drove home, my phone was already lighting up with messages. My mother asking to talk. My father sending a vague text about planning for the future. Lila sending links to houses she, jokingly, said would be perfect for the whole family. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I opened my laptop and began making a list. Not of what I owed them, but of everything they'd ever taken from me emotionally, financially, quietly, without asking. Every favor I'd done without recognition. Every boundary they'd crossed without consequence. They thought exposing me had given them power. They had no idea what they'd just started. I didn't answer any of their messages that night. Or the next morning. Silence has a way of making people reveal their true intentions, and I needed to see exactly who I was dealing with now that the secret was out. By the second day, the tone of the messages changed. Concern turned into urgency. Urgency turned into frustration. My mother left a voicemail telling me she was worried about me, that I seemed distant, like distance hadn't been the foundation of our relationship for years. My father's texts grew longer, full of words. Like responsibility and legacy. Lila, on the other hand, stopped pretending entirely. She sent me a long message outlining all the ways my money could help the family, complete with numbers, timelines, and a casual mention of how unfair it would look if I said no. That was when I realized this wasn't about Thanksgiving anymore. It was about entitlement. I agreed to meet them the following weekend, not because I felt guilty, but because I wanted clarity. I wanted to hear them say it out loud. We met at my parents' house again, the same place where my privacy had been ripped open like a party trick. This time, I arrived prepared. Calm, detached, observing. Lila wasted no time. So, she said, crossing her arms as soon as I sat down. Have you thought about how you're going to handle this? I smiled faintly. Handle what? She gestured around the room. Us. The situation. You can't just pretend nothing changed. My mother sighed dramatically. Lila, be gentle. Then she turned to me. We're not asking for anything unreasonable. We just think, given how well you're doing, that it's time you gave back. Gave back. As if I'd taken something from them. I asked them a simple question. What exactly do you think I owe you? The room went quiet. My father cleared his throat and started talking about sacrifices. About how they'd raised me, fed me, given me opportunities. Lila jumped in, reminding me how hard things had been for her, how she'd always had to struggle more because she had children to think about. Not once did anyone ask how I felt. Not once did they acknowledge why I'd kept my finances private in the first place. When I told them I wasn't giving anyone money, Lila laughed like I'd told a joke. You're serious, she said. You're just going to sit on millions while mom and dad are getting older and my kids. I'm serious, I said evenly. My mother's eyes filled with tears instantly. Perfect timing. I don't understand how you became so cold, she said. We didn't raise you this way. That was the moment something in me finally snapped, not loudly, not dramatically, but cleanly. You didn't raise me to be honest with you, I replied. You raised me to stay quiet so Lila could shine. You raised me to not ask for help because there was always someone more important. Lila scoffed. This again. Yes, I said. This again. Because it never stopped. I stood up to leave, but my father stopped me. If you walk out now, he said, don't expect things to be the same. I looked at him. They've never been the same. I left without another word. That night, I met with my attorney. Not because I was afraid they could take my money legally, but because I knew emotional pressure had a way of turning ugly. We reviewed my accounts, my trusts, the companies I had stakes in. Everything was locked down, protected, unassailable. Still, we added another layer, clear instructions that no family member had access, authority, or leverage under any circumstances. A few days later, the real campaign began. Extended family members started calling. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly wanted to catch up. An aunt hinted that my mother was having such a hard time, and that it would mean the world to her if I helped. Someone leaked the story beyond my immediate family, an exaggerated version where I was a secret millionaire hoarding wealth while everyone else suffered. I didn't correct them. Instead, I watched. Lila posted vague messages on social media about betrayal and greed, careful not to name me, but clear enough that anyone who knew us would understand. Friends of hers commented with sympathy, calling whoever had hurt her disgusting and heartless. My mother liked every single comment. That hurt more than I expected, but it also clarified everything. One evening, my mother showed up unannounced at my place. I hadn't told her my address, but Lila had always been good at digging. She looked smaller standing there, older than I remembered. For a moment, I almost let her in out of habit. Almost. I just want to talk, she said, eyes glossy. Please. Against my better judgment, I did. She sat on my couch and cried, telling me she was scared about the future, that she didn't understand why I was punishing her. She said Lila was angry, that the family was divided, that everything felt like it was falling apart. Then she said the sentence I'd been waiting for. If you don't help us, she said quietly, you're going to destroy this family. I looked at her for a long time before answering. No, I said. I'm just refusing to be destroyed by it. Her expression hardened then, grief turning into resentment. So that's it? She asked. You won't even consider it? I considered it years ago, I replied. Every time I was overlooked. Every time my needs were minimized. I chose myself then. I'm choosing myself now. She left without saying goodbye. The next morning, I woke up to an email from Lila. It was long, furious, and cruel. She accused me of being greedy, selfish, ungrateful. She said I'd changed, that money had made me arrogant. Near the end, she wrote something that made my hands go cold. If you won't do the right thing, she wrote, we'll find another way. That was when I knew this wasn't just emotional warfare anymore. I forwarded the email to my attorney. Within days, my parents received formal letters outlining boundaries. No harassment. No attempts to access my financial information. No public defamation. The response was immediate. My mother called, screaming that I'd embarrassed her. My father accused me of threatening the family. Lila blocked me everywhere. And suddenly, the noise stopped. Weeks passed. Then months. The holidays came and went without invitations, without messages. For the first time, the silence wasn't suffocating. It was peaceful. I focused on my work, my life, the future I'd built with intention and care. I told myself it was over. I was wrong. Because just when I thought they had finally accepted my answer, Lila made one last move, one that would force everything into the open, and give me the opportunity to respond in a way none of them saw coming. Lila's last move came quietly at first, disguised as concern. I found out through a mutual acquaintance who forwarded me a message she'd sent, asking questions about my business interests, my companies, my investments overseas. The tone was innocent, but the intent was obvious. When curiosity doesn't work, people try leverage. When leverage fails, they try exposure. A week later, I received an email from an unfamiliar address. It was from a journalist. They said they were working on a piece about hidden wealth and family disputes, and wanted my side of the story. They mentioned Thanksgiving. They mentioned my sister. They mentioned the number. That was when it all clicked. Lila hadn't just complained. She'd shopped the story around. She had framed it as a moral tale, how a sibling with millions refused to help struggling parents and nieces, how greed had torn a family apart. She expected public shame to do what guilt couldn't. I didn't panic. I didn't rush to defend myself. I asked the journalist a single question: who contacted you first? They didn't answer directly, but they didn't have to. I declined the interview and forwarded the email to my attorney. Then, for the first time since Thanksgiving, I made a decision that wasn't defensive. I went on the offensive. Within days, my legal team sent cease and desist letters not just to my sister, but to anyone attempting to share false or misleading information about my finances. We documented every post, every message, every rumor. We compiled a timeline, years of emotional manipulation, financial pressure, and now attempted public coercion. And then I did something Lila never expected. I told the truth. Not online, not on social media, but privately, carefully, and permanently. I arranged a meeting with my parents and Lila at a neutral location, with my attorney present. They arrived tense and defensive, clearly assuming this was finally the moment I'd caved. Lila even smiled when she saw me, like she'd already won. She hadn't. I laid everything out calmly. The trusts, the conditions, the fact that my wealth wasn't a lottery win or a lucky break, it was the result of decades of work, risk, and sacrifice. I showed them documentation proving that my money was legally insulated and untouchable. I explained that any attempt to publicly misrepresent my finances or pressure me would result in consequences they wouldn't enjoy. Then I addressed the part none of them wanted to hear. I didn't hide my money because I was ashamed, I said. I hid it because I knew exactly what would happen if you found out. My mother opened her mouth to argue, but I continued. Since Thanksgiving, not one of you has asked how I am. Not one of you has said you're proud of me. All you've talked about is what I should give. That tells me everything. Lila scoffed. So you're really going to cut us off? Over money. I looked at her. No, over behavior. I slid one final document across the table. It wasn't a check. It wasn't an offer. It was a statement, clear, formal, irreversible. I had created a charitable foundation in my grandparents' name, dedicated to education and financial literacy. It would fund scholarships, community programs, and support for people who actually asked for help instead of demanding it. My family's names were nowhere on it. I've already decided where my money goes, I said. And it won't be used as a reward for entitlement. The silence was absolute. My father looked stunned. My mother looked devastated. Lila looked furious. You did this to punish us, she snapped. I shook my head. I did this to free myself. That was the last time we met as a family. In the months that followed, the story Lila tried to sell collapsed under its own weight. Without my participation, without proof, it lost momentum. People moved on. Drama always does when there's nothing left to extract. My parents tried once more to reach out, softer this time, quieter. I answered politely, briefly. I made it clear the door wasn't slammed shut, but it would never open the way it used to. No money, no rescues, no rewriting history. Lila never apologized, but she didn't need to. Because the real ending wasn't about watching her fail or seeing my parents regret their choices. It was about something much simpler and far more powerful. I stopped needing their approval. I stopped shrinking to keep peace. I stopped explaining myself to people who only listened when they wanted something. I built a life so solid that exposure couldn't threaten it. They thought revealing my wealth would give them control. Instead, it revealed the truth. And once you see that clearly, there's nothing left to take from you at all.